Hello, today's content for health psychology relates to sleep, dreams, insomnia, and meditation. We'll look at these 6 questions today. What is sleep and why do we need it? How much sleep do we need? What is the relationship between sleep and health? What are the stages of sleep and what happens during these stages? Why do we dream? How can we explain our dreams? Do they impact us? We'll talk about insomnia and look at 4 factors explaining why it occurs and why it persists. And finally, we'll take a look at meditation and how it can replace sleep in some cases if it's beneficial, and how it can offer the same mental health benefits as sleep. So what is sleep? Well, it's a naturally recurring state of mind and body characterized by altered consciousness, relatively inhibited sensory activity, meaning we're not taking in information through our senses as we might in our waking existence. Inhibition of nearly all voluntary muscles, meaning that during most parts of our sleep we don't move our bodies. And reduced interactions with surroundings. So we would have lack of engagement or be even unaware of what's happening around us. We look at why sleep. If you think about it, it's really risky. I mean, we're vulnerable if we sleep. We're unaware of our surroundings, so somebody can sneak up to us. We know it's even riskier for some other creatures. Dolphins sleep, even though they have to remain afloat in order to breathe. So the risk is that they would stop breathing. Ducks are quite vulnerable, so they tend to sleep in these groupings like this, and one or the other on the ends will sleep with just one eye open. That is, they would keep one half of their brain awake and the other half of their brain would sleep, and that's so that they can remain aware of their surroundings. I don't have a good photo of it. I looked around for one. Sea otters are also vulnerable when they sleep, and they sometimes sleep holding hands to keep from floating apart. So for all of us, sleep, think of all you could get done if you didn't have to spend so much time sleeping. And yet think also, would you give up your opportunity for sleep if you could just get by without sleep the rest of your life? And most of us feel, I don't think I would want to, personally, even if I could get a lot more done. So we feel the benefits of sleep and we appreciate our opportunities to rest each day. All right, so why do we sleep though if it's such a risky endeavor? Well, we know that if without sleep, that's the best way to know why we need sleep, we suffer a lot of psychological and physical effects. For example, in our brain, we'll tend to be irritable, so we're less skillful at regulating our emotion. We won't think as clearly. We'll have cognitive impairment, meaning we're not thinking as clearly. We can't solve problems as well. We might have memory lapses or even loss if we don't sleep for a long time, if we don't integrate our memories. That happens during sleep. We might have impaired moral judgment, not be able to make good decisions about right and wrong. Of course, we would have severe yawning, which is like a kind of a blacking out state in some ways. Hallucinations, imagining things that aren't there, or symptoms that are similar to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. All of this just in our thinking and our ability to function. Our immune system won't function as well in helping us fight disease if we're sleep deprived. Our risk of contracting type 2 diabetes, which is a malfunction of our insulin system that helps us process food, those risks increase if we have sleep deprivation. We would have greater heart rate variability, so greater risk of heart disease as we put more strain on our heart. We'd have increased reaction time with our muscles. That is, we're going to react more slowly in terms of, say, when you're driving and being able to get your foot on the brake in time to prevent an accident. We'll be less accurate. So if we're engaged in a sport or a small motor thing, our accuracy will decrease with sleep deprivation. We may experience tremors or shakiness. We may experience aches as our body lacks the capacity to recover. We also know that under prolonged sleep deprivation, our growth will be suppressed. The hormones that allow us to grow and mature will be suppressed. We're at greater risk of obesity, and we have decreased body temperature. So there's a lot of physical consequences of sleep deprivation. So what is then the function of sleep? Well, first and foremost, we can talk about a function as including restoration or repair. Our brain activity is reduced during one part of our sleep, our slow wave sleep, where we're having delta waves. And since our brain activity is reduced, this allows our glial cells, which are worker cells in our brain, they're not our neurons, but the workers, they can clean fluid around the neurons. And this prevents buildup and allows easy transmission of neural activity. Without that cleanup, we have increased risk of things like plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. During sleep, we also know that we consolidate learning and memory. If you've heard at some point that you're studying something difficult, you're learning a new language or you're learning your statistics, and you study for a while and then you sleep, you will know it better when you awaken than if you didn't sleep. So we know that that happens because we're strengthening synapses, which are the connections in our brain. They're getting stronger, more efficient, more myelin on those axons. And we're pruning out connections that we don't need. So we're allowing our brain to function more efficiently. And we're also organizing new information to connect with existing neural pathways. So our brain is organizing it, kind of making decisions based on what we demand of it as to what should be connected and what shouldn't. We know also that sleep serves the function of conserving energy and reallocating energy. So we are determining what demands are being placed on our body at a given time and then devoting energy to that. So if we have just taxed our muscles badly with some sort of work or some sort of exercise during sleep, our system can reallocate energy to repair those muscles or allow us to heal. Decreased metabolism, or the processing of all of our energy during sleep. We're not utilizing energy as rapidly. It gives our bodily systems all a rest. Finally, we're not eating anything. We don't have to digest any food. We're not using our muscles, so everything can rest. And that energy that we save is used for repair of cells and tissue. So if we were awake, we didn't sleep, we'd have to continue to use that energy to maintain our waking state. But since we sleep, we can reallocate that energy to healing. And our immune system is regulated and directed there. If you think of your immune system as a bunch of sort of warriors in your bloodstream, determining where the forces need to go, you know, what do we need to be ramping up right now in terms of our antibodies? Well, during sleep, when you're not taxing all of your resources so much as you are during the waking state, then your immune system can sort of make decisions, so to speak, about what's needed in terms of fighting off invaders in your body. And of course, we dream. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit, and you'll see a little TED Talk on that. So you should know that we have typical cycles that take place during sleep. So if you go to bed at 11 and you sleep till 7, a typical person will drop down from an awake state into a dream state. So when you first fall asleep, you'll be in sort of this stage of sleep where your body, it's called paradoxical sleep because your body doesn't move, and yet your brain is almost as active as when it's awake. So your brain is doing a lot of work during REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And that's, boy, if you ever watch someone when they're in this state, you can see their eyeballs moving behind their eyelids. The eyes are closed, but you can see the eyeballs moving. If you watch your dog sleep, you can notice that your dog might be dreaming. You could possibly, depending on your breed of dog, you can possibly see the eyeballs moving behind his eyelids, but you may notice some other things too, some like uncontrolled twitching, or my dogs sometimes do these little barks that come out from like their vocal cords but don't involve movement of the mouth, and so you'll hear woo, woo, woo. And so they kind of talk during their sleep, and sometimes there's some involuntary movement, but there's not any you wouldn't actually be like rolling over during this stage of sleep or anything like that. And then you enter your non-REM sleep, and that's the sleep without the rapid eye movement and without dreams. And these stages just refer to the brain waves during these different stages of sleep. And when they get to their slowest, longest, deepest waves, that's your deepest sleep, non-REM stage 3. And this is the stage when your body is reallocating all that energy and it can kind of recover. So if you're sick, you're going to have a lot more of this kind of sleep. And then after a bit, you come out, back up, back through into REM sleep. And if you're a good, healthy sleeper, you don't come fully awake during this stage. For people who suffer from some sleep disorders, they may tend to come awake during this stage and then maybe have trouble dropping back in again. And then typically you'll drop back into another deep sleep cycle, just as before, maybe a little bit shorter. And then you'll come back up again into dream state. Maybe here is where you'll wake, you'll come conscious for a minute, check out your surroundings. If people are older, sometimes they need to use the bathroom. This might be the time. And then you'll come right back down into deep sleep, but you'll notice the deep sleep is getting shorter. You're having more of this sleep that is non-REM, but it's not those really deep healing waves. Then you'll come back up and you'll notice your REM sleep is going to be a little bit longer here toward 4 a.m. Typically you remember your dreams when you wake up at the end of them. So here, whatever happened in this dream state, you're more likely to remember if you've come awake. Then you'll drop into a relatively short deep sleep time. There's not much more recovery that needs to happen. And then you'll come into a longer dream state. And we'll talk about in a moment that this is where your dreams are being processed. And so now you're getting on morning, and if it's winter, it's still dark out, so you come awake and it's dark and you can drop back in again. In summer, that's harder because it's light and you're coming awake. But just briefly, you're maybe remembering your dream and then dropping back off again, but you're not going fully down into this deep healing sleep. And then you come back into a long dreaming stage, a long REM stage before you wake up for the day. So these different stages of sleep have different functions. And let me just see, I think that I itemized that on the next slide, but as I'll just point out again in case I didn't, because I can't remember now, that this deep sleep is associated with physical healing and your immune system function, things related to your body and energy metabolism. And this REM sleep is associated with psychological things, dream memory formation, memory organization, I should say. And this is when your dreaming occurs. And here we go. I did outline it a little more. So stage 1 is your transition. Maybe you're just falling asleep and then all of a sudden your muscles jerk and you wake up again. If you look at the brain waves during this stage, you can see those spikes and things in your muscles as you're falling asleep. So that's your transition. Stage 2, you're having this light sleep. Your heart rate is slowing down, your temperature is dropping, your brain waves are slowing with these sleep spindles, alternating periods of muscle tone and relaxation. So you're just kind of settling everything down in your body. Half of your sleep time is thought to be spent in this stage 2. Your non-REM stage 3 is deep sleep. So you're hard to wake when you're in this stage. You might be disoriented and groggy. If your alarm clock goes off and you wake up and you don't know where you are for a minute, that's because you've been awakened from this deep sleep stage. You're coming from a much deeper place and having to regain yourself. Your blood pressure drops. Your breathing is deep, slow, rhythmic. You might hear those pauses in between the breaths be a little bit longer. The body's immobile, but it can function. Unlike in your REM sleep, where your body is, you might have those involuntary twitches, but your body is not, you can't control the function of your body during your REM sleep. And your hormones are not active in controlling the functions they normally control, like growth and appetite. So that instead, that is used to restore and rejuvenate cells. And then your REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep, is when your mind energizes itself, but your body becomes paralyzed. So you can't voluntarily move your body. Your breathing is shallow, irregular, your heart rate and blood pressure rise, you dream. And your alpha waves, which are the waves that you would have during an awake state, is what are present during REM sleep. And so that is the revitalization of your brain to support sharp and alert daytime function, and of course, you're dreaming. 20% of time is spent in REM sleep in adults, but infants, this is 50% of the time because they have so much more consolidation of memories to do as they find their way into this human life. So REM sleep and dreaming, what is the source of our dreams? Let's take a look at what Freud suggests. He gives us this idea of the psyche, which is an iceberg floating in an ocean. And he says that our conscious mind, the things that we are aware of, or the things just below the surface that we can recall with a little thought, that occupies only 5 to 10%. So the part of ourselves that we're aware of is the smallest part, just this part that's visible to us. Much more of ourselves exists below the surface. In our subconscious mind, the parts that we're not aware of, but that are still motivating us all the time. And these might have to do with, say, things that happen during infancy, things that happen before we were born, just fleeting things that are motivating us and moving us through our survival, our id part of our psyche, but we're unaware of them. We can't recall them because we didn't have adequate processing capacity at those very young ages to integrate them into our conscious thinking processes. So how does this relate to dreams? Well, this relates to dreams because Freud says that our dreams have manifest and latent content. So we know that our memories are being organized and integrated during our dream state. So what are all those stories? So the manifest content is what we actually dream about. And the latent content is what it means. So the meaning, the latent content, is coming up from that big part of the iceberg, the unconscious, that we're unaware of. And it's coming into something that our minds can grapple with, something that's part of our consciousness, and that's the manifest content. So the manifest content is a dream is like that story that we wake up and we say, oh my gosh, I just had the weirdest dream. I was being chased by a javelina and ran into a wall that I could not get past. And you'll just be thinking, well, that's a pretty strange dream. You know, what does that mean? Why did I dream that? Well, the idea that Freud suggests is that that dream was part of a conflict that you were having deeper inside of you, maybe relating to an earlier experience in your life. You know, something that frightened you or some sort of a emotional experience you had when you were very young. And so the latent content is the content of your dream that you're not aware of. Maybe it's related to a feeling that you've repressed. Maybe you're in a relationship and you've repressed a feeling about your partner, but you have some deep psychological noise related to something your partner did. And so that latent content that you're unaware of would come out in some weird current state dream. So going back to that iceberg then, all of that content could include things that happened a long time ago, but they also include like repressed feelings, things that you've rejected in yourself, or feelings that you haven't acknowledged. And so he would say all of that's coming out during your dream, and you're just making sense of it in the only way you know how, which is through part of your conscious processing. Now Jung added to this. I always like Jung's idea. He says we're not alone as our floating iceberg alone in the ocean. We're all actually floating icebergs all over this ocean, interacting with and colliding with each other. And the ocean itself represents a collective unconscious, like the wisdom that is a part of all of us just for being in the ocean. So we're not aware of this wisdom. It's like our collective wisdom, and we can't access it. We have to go down through our personal, through our personal unconscious to get into this collective unconscious. But what's bobbing around here in this ocean are all of our, let's say, archetypes, which are images that are common across all humanity, or like wisdom, or like common human experiences, or maybe even common universal experience that are common to all life forms. Like all of the essence of life is in this ocean, and we can learn from it, but we have to kind of get through our own personal stuff first. So during our dream state is a time when that collective unconscious impacts can come up all the way up into our waking state, our dream state. So it's a state not just of having motivations from your own personal experience or personal iceberg emerge, but also from having ideas that are true to all humanity, or maybe solutions or things like that that come into our conscious thinking. So there are 4 scientific theories of dreaming. And these are like evolutionary psychology, if you think of it. Like, the idea behind this is we have dreams as humans, and if we have dreams, they must be somehow adaptive, or allow us as individuals or us as a species to persist. And so based on that idea, people try to explain what's going on with these dreams, based on the idea that they're present for a reason. So the first is that it's a threat simulation theory, suggests that dreams are ancient biological defense mechanisms allowing us to simulate threatening conditions to better prepare for responses. So we have our dream state so that we can practice responding to scary situations. A second theory is called the expectation fulfillment theory. Dreams discharge emotional arousals that were not expressed during the day to free up brain space for dealing with the next day's emotional arousals. So our emotions are primitive. They're not conscious like our thinking is. We can become aware of them, but we often don't know the source of them. They come from that bigger part of the iceberg, to use Freud's metaphor. So we're going to have emotional arousal each day. He suggests there's always going to be something, and our dream state is like releasing that so that we can get ready for the next day's emotional arousals. The activation synthesis theory, the least romantic of these theories, suggests that dreams are just the neural firings involved in the memory consolidation process. So we're trying to consolidate all our memories of things that happened during our day, and as we do so, we're having our neurons fire. And as you know, neurons fire through electrochemical energy. So there's going to be impulses happening in the brain, and as those impulses happen, little images pop up. And when we awake into consciousness and remember the dream, our brains link these things together and make a semi-coherent story out of them. And finally, the continuation hypothesis suggests that our dreams are continuations of episodes and events that happen during the day. So we're just continuing to work on those things during our sleep state. And he'll talk a bit in his TED Talk about what evidence there is for this and what impacts those dreams, the continuation of those stories at night, have on our interactions during the day. So, how much sleep do you need? A lot of people think they need 8 hours of sleep. They were told that a long time ago, and they still believe it. And so, what do we need, and how does that impact how we think about sleep? So these are National Sleep Foundation recommendations that we need at younger ages. We need more sleep. We have more work to do. So we can see that we need, sorry, this is a little bit cropped off here. During our newborn time, we need 14 to 17 hours of sleep. Infancy, 12 to 15 each 24-hour period. And the older we get, the less sleep we need. And what we're looking at here are actually the parameters. So 14 to 17 is the most common for a newborn, but as little as 11 or as much as 19 are still sometimes happening. Most commonly 14 to 17. That's what these green bars represent on the bottom and top of the blue. So an infant 10 or 11 might be enough for some, 16 to 18 might be right for others, but mostly it's between 12 and 15. So that's how you can read those numbers. The teenage years, often sleep is sacrificed during these teen years, but 8 to 10 hours of sleep is typically thought to be what's needed. As little as 7 for some teens might be adequate, as much as 11 might be needed for others. It's sacrificed at this stage often because teens tend to have a delayed sleep cycle related directly to melatonin production that shifts to a little bit later around the time of puberty. And so they're staying up later, but generally they still have to get up early for school, and this causes a lot of sleep deprivation at this important time during the adolescent years, which is quite unfortunate. You can see when we get to these young adult years, 7 to 9 is about right, fewer for some, more for others, and that need persists, but actually you have less during the adult years, you have less of this opportunity for these long sleep-ins. Maybe you're just so much busier. And finally, when you get to old age, which is what this last one is, you can see that 7 to 8 is average, but as little as 5 to 6 for some people. So the need for sleep has decreased. And if you think about this, the body is no longer devoting a lot of energy to reproductive functions. And that takes a lot of energy during all of these reproductive years. And so we no longer have to devote that energy, so less sleep is needed. And then also in that time frame, many adults, it's not advisable, but many adults stop learning as much. They stop taking on new information. They're settled into a routine. And so for that reason, the sleep needs also decrease because there's just not as much new information to process. So if you answered 8 for how much sleep you need, you'd be right spot on in the middle of what is typically thought to be needed. But sometimes we can interfere with our own ability to sleep by getting stuck on these numbers. So let's go on and take a look at the impact of sleep on mental health and then on insomnia. So we know that having sleep problems is comorbid or strongly related to some other disorders, primarily related to depression. So prevalence of sleep problems with people who have had a depressive episode, 26% of them has also had sleep problems. So you can see that there's a higher, there's a comorbidity is what it's called. A brief depressive episode, a subsyndromal depression, not quite depression, but very close, or no depression. So the more you have a sleep problem, the more likely you are to also have had experienced depression. These things go together. So there's a correlation between sleep disorders and mood disorders. Now, the APA, when you take your abnormal psych class, you'll know that it's considered to be a symptom of depression. Sleep is a symptom of depression, but I did hear an interesting talk at UA last year that suggested that could we look at it the other way? Could depression be a symptom of poor sleep? And so there's a lot of work into this, and we know that all we have is a correlation. We know that people who are depressed also tend to have sleep problems. People who have sleep problems also tend to be depressed. So these things go hand in hand. But we know that any time we have a correlation, there are 3 plausible explanations. The first is that we have an expected cause effect. Depression causes sleep anomalies. We expect that if you're depressed, it causes you to sleep poorly. That's what is thought right now, and that's what's indicated in the DSM. But it could be that the reverse is true. All we know is that they go together. So if it's reversed cause effect, it could be that having sleep anomalies, sleep problems, causes depression. And the third variable is that some unknown factor contributes to both sleep anomalies and depression. You'll notice I didn't write insomnia because the sleep anomalies associated with depression can go both ways. People can sleep excessively and have trouble getting up and moving, or people can have difficulty sleeping at all. So what unknown factor might cause both sleep anomalies and depression? Well, maybe it could be something biochemical like low serotonin. Or maybe it could be like a factor in your life. You're anxious about something, you're worried about, say, your relationship, and so you're having trouble sleeping, and you're feeling a bit depressed. So we don't know exactly what this relationship is, but there is a relationship. Sleep deprivation and trauma. Sleep to remember, sleep to forget. So during our REM sleep, we process emotional memories via amygdala activation. So the emotional part of our brain, that primitive part of our brain that we share with other creatures that allows us to respond well to potentially dangerous situations, we process that during our sleep. So if we have a trauma and it prevents us from sleeping, then it may interfere with function, as in post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So we've never allowed our amygdala to process that emotion, so it continues to be triggerable through that same experience. So it works like this. We need the sleep. Our emotions and lead to our emotion regulation, how well we cope with it and how well we are aroused. So we have emotions that we have to cope with and that give us a certain level of reactivity. Then we sleep. And during that time, we have all this process related to energy and alertness and our emotional processing. And then the dream processing that allows us to work through that emotion and our emotional brain networks. And they all interact with our capacity to process our next day's emotions. So if we don't have this stage, this REM sleep and all of the things that happen during that sleep, then we don't have a way of regulating things. So there is an interesting therapy that's it's efficacious. That means it has evidence supporting it. It's called eye movement desensitization therapy, and it uses the acronym EMDR. And what they do is they know that there's rapid eye movement during sleep. We don't really know the function of that, but the thought was, well, could we mimic that rapid eye movement manually? Make people move their eyes rapidly, and if we can do so while they're thinking and talking about an emotional memory, maybe that will allow this processing to occur. And in fact, it works. So they use a strobe light, and they request that an individual keep their eyes on this rapidly moving strobe while they talk about their trauma, and that seems to help them consolidate that emotional memory, and it's been effective for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. So some people do have trouble sleeping though, and maybe especially after a trauma. So how do we define insomnia, the inability to sleep? Quote, dissatisfaction with sleep quality or quantity, characterized by difficulty initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, or early morning awakenings that cause significant distress or impairment in daytime functioning and occur at least 3 nights a week for 3 months despite adequate opportunity for sleep. So if you have a new baby who's always waking you up, that's not considered insomnia. If, however, the new baby starts to sleep well and you continue to wake up for 3 months, that's insomnia. And it can be really hard on people if you've ever experienced it. So 5 to 35% of the population has had insomnia at some point in their lives, and 10 to 15% have persistent insomnia. It doesn't get better. The symptoms then of persistent, this long enduring insomnia is depression, anxiety, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, increased alcohol and substance use, increased use of our healthcare system as people try to get treatment, non-motor vehicle accidents, chronic pain, all of these things that we talked about earlier related to sleep deprivation. So we have a 4-factor model of insomnia. Our 4 factors are here: this conditioned arousal, perpetuating, precipitating, and predisposing. So the arousal, and this is the target for treatment. So we'll look at this, and then we'll look at what these factors mean, and then we'll come back to this. So predisposing factors are the starting point, and they're represented in this maroon bar, and they might include being female. Females have greater risk of insomnia. Aging, as you get older, you have greater risk of insomnia. If you have a trait of getting aroused easily, like your sympathetic nervous system activates easily, you have a quick sympathetic, your heart rate increases rapidly in the event of a stressor. And then if you have a history, someone in your family, your mother always had insomnia, or you yourself have had it in the past, those are predisposing factors. So you can see that in this chart, all of those, they've sort of laid out for equal. On the x-axis of the chart, we can see premorbid. You're beginning to, you haven't had your sleep disorder yet. Acute means, oh my gosh, it's just kicked in. Early, chronic, it's continuing to go on, then right after you've gotten treatment, and then if you've responded to treatment. So that's what they're laying out here. So then, in addition to the predisposing factors, we have precipitating factors. And so factors that trigger initial insomnia might be stress. You know, usually when you get insomnia, you're predisposed with these first conditions, and then something happens and all of a sudden you start losing sleep. So stress, that could be due to, COVID-19, or you're caring for someone, or your loved one is ill, or you're worried about a breakup, some sort of stressor. Maybe your work schedule. Like, one of the worst things is to work these swing shifts where you're having to readjust your sleep schedule for a week or so at a time, or even worse, every day at a time, over a long period of time. And that could definitely trigger insomnia, because you've just taken away all of your body's cues from it. A trauma, a really acute severe stressor, or a health condition that interferes with sleep, all of these can precipitate the onset of this episode of insomnia. We will look at these other two factors on the next slides, but I want to just orient you to this one more time. So we have, again, these are the predisposing factors, the factors that set the stage for you to develop insomnia. And then there's your precipitating factor, the thing that triggered it. And then you're early in your stage of insomnia, and there's something that in this purple, light purple color, that's perpetuating it, causing that insomnia to persist. This is your threshold for insomnia. And then there's conditional arousal, which is then you kind of learn that you can't sleep. And we'll look at this more closely. But I wanted to point this out. If you're going to use a method, very often treatment for insomnia is through what we call CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. TX just means treatment. It's a shorthand for treatment. And they usually target this perpetuating stage. So that's typically, if you're going to work with someone's thinking and behaviors to change their sleep habits, generally you're going to be addressing it at this perpetuating stage, like what is causing this insomnia to persist. And then after that, you'll get below the threshold, and then you can remove the conditioned arousal factors and then be back down to normal. So let's look next at the perpetuating factors. What are the things that make this, now your baby's no longer waking you up. Now you're no longer working swing shifts, but you're still having insomnia. What's causing it? What's perpetuating it? Well, part of that can be faulty beliefs and attitudes. So you can have beliefs and attitudes that aren't right. Like, you can have unrealistic expectations about how much sleep you need. You could say, oh my gosh, this often plays out like this. You're falling asleep and you can't fall asleep, and you keep looking at the clock. And it's 2 a.m. and you have to get up at 6. And then it's 3 a.m. and you have to get up at 6. And you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, now I only have 3 hours left for sleep. Now I only have 2 hours. Now I didn't have enough sleep. I'm going to be miserable all day. So you kind of create that for yourself. And that's related to the second bullet, misattributions of daytime impairments. You wake up feeling a little irritable and you go, oh, that's right, I didn't get any sleep last night. And so you perpetuate that irritability. And sometimes we're not very good at appraising whether we slept. When you put people under EEG, measure their brainwaves while they're sleeping, very often we find that they were in fact sleeping, even though they thought they weren't. So sometimes that can happen as well. Maladaptive sleep behaviors then sometimes emerge. So we're looking at cognitions and behaviors, and the maladaptive sleep behaviors might involve spending too much time in bed, or napping during the day to further interfere with that sleep schedule, or having an irregular schedule, staying up all night some nights and other nights going to bed early, having sleep interfering activities in the bedroom, like screens in the bedroom or eating in the bedroom. Things like sex can go either way in terms of doing it in the bedroom. If it's pretty healthy, it can help people relax, but if there's any kind of tension involved, it can also kind of make it worse, or if one is involved and the other isn't, they can make it worse. I think this is a common thing that happens after a baby is born, and mom is very tired, or dad is. And then taking substances to fall asleep or to stay awake can interfere with those sleep behaviors. And so then the last factor, and so the target for cognitive behavioral therapy are those behaviors and thoughts. And if you go to get help for insomnia and you get a CBT approach, that's where it will be. And then you have this conditioned arousal. So then you teach yourself, oh my gosh, I don't even want to look at my bed because I've had so many hours in there just laying awake. You just learn that you're going to be awake in bed. And so hypnotic drugs are designed for that, so that you can fall asleep and no longer have that association between laying in bed awake. But it is difficult to modify this because, as you know from behaviorist theory, in order to modify these associations, you have to have repeated occurrences of the trigger without the reaction, or the being in bed without the insomnia. So you have to have a few of those at least before you're going to break up that association. And a little bit of a taste, even if you break it and you find that you can go to bed and sleep again, if there's just one little taste of insomnia, it can rekindle all of that conditioned arousal again. So that is the piece of that behaviorist paradigm that would be worked on, as well as working on this arousal. Correcting the condition that causes you to associate being in bed with not being able to sleep. So on this slide, we're going to look at cognitive behavioral strategies for insomnia, but then also we'll look at the cognitive piece and then also some behavioral approaches. So we know that cognitive behavioral therapy attempts to interfere with thinking and behaviors and become aware of emotions. So this is an interaction of these three factors. Sleep restriction is something we'll look at in just a moment. Sleep compression therapy or sleep efficiency therapy. Stimulus control is controlling the exposure to wake promoting stimuli we'll look at. We'll look at sleep hygiene, which is practices that promote sleep. And we'll look at cognitive restructuring, changing the misguided thoughts about sleep. So in order to deal with insomnia, and I've dealt with insomnia, my goodness, it's really important to keep a good sleep log. It's helpful, to be realistic. Now we have even apps that can keep track of your sleep through certain physiological functions, which can be even better. You can download apps on your phone. Some are better than others. But it'll help you identify your type of insomnia, like when are you awake, your total sleep ability, and the factors that might contribute to your insomnia. Sleep restriction therapy, as I said, is restricting your time in bed to the number of hours asleep. And so part of it might be having this all night up that can reset it. Part of it might be just restricting your time in bed to the number of hours you want to sleep and then get up. You have rigid bed and rise times, so you go to bed at exactly the same time and you get up at exactly the same time regardless of what other factors might have changed. And so you're going to consolidate your sleep. And then gradually you're going to extend your sleep opportunity. So you're not even going to try for very much sleep. You're going to go lay in your bed for 5 hours and you're going to get up no matter what. And so that'll help to get your routine back into a normal state. Stimulus control, as I mentioned earlier, you go to bed only when you are sleepy. You don't use your bed or bedroom for anything else. If you can't fall asleep after 5 to 15 or 20 minutes, you're going to leave the bed and the bedroom. Hide the clock, repeat as necessary. So you're never going to stay in bed unless you're sleeping. And then you're going to wake up. Even if you slept poorly, you're going to get out of bed. And you're not going to take naps. You're not going to lay in bed and take naps. You're just going to say, all right, when it's night, when I want to be sleeping, when I'm tired, I'm not going to do stimulating activities. And then when I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to look at my screen. I'm going to go to sleep. But if after 15 to 20 minutes I'm not asleep, I'm going to get up again. And no matter what, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. So that is just what you do. Very disciplined routines. And sleep hygiene involves things like this: going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends, avoiding caffeine, exposing yourself to bright light in the morning right away to get your biological clock set. Make sure your bedroom is conducive to sleep. It should be dark, quiet, comfortable, cool. Do the best you can to facilitate a nice sleep environment. Make sure the mattress and pillow are suitable to you. Don't go to bed hungry, but also don't give yourself a heavy meal right before sleep so that your body is digesting. Develop a relaxing routine like a bath and music and reading, something calm, tea, chamomile tea. Nothing's in the bedroom with you. Your cell phone's not there, your computer, TV, video, nothing is in there. Just sleep. Exercise regularly during the day. You all know how tired you feel if you've had a really good long hike, how easy it is to sleep. Give yourself some of that. And if your pets are a bother to you in the bedroom, don't have them. You don't want your pets to be waking you up. And then challenging dysfunctional beliefs about sleep. I am determined to go to sleep isn't going to help you. These are some examples of dysfunctional beliefs. Everyone needs 8 hours of sleep. I only got 7.5. I'm going to be miserable all day. If I don't sleep, catastrophic things will happen. If I don't sleep by 10 o'clock, I will never fall asleep. If I don't fall asleep by 10 o'clock, I'm going to have an awful day tomorrow. There's nothing I can do to have a good night's sleep. I need to try harder to fall asleep. All of these are examples of dysfunctional sleep cognitions. So you need to change those. Every time you say one, question yourself as if you were questioning someone outside of yourself who's saying these things. Now, we aren't talking a lot about this in this chapter, but meditation is a practice that a skillful meditator, their brain will be serving the same cleaning and healing purposes during a strong meditative state as it does during sleep. So meditation is a reduction of the noise in your brain, a deliberate focus on something like your breath or your body, and you're just gently readjusting your brain to focus on that state and not allowing all of those thoughts to come in. And it's a very safe practice. It can be combined with cognitive behavioral therapy. It may improve physical health by reducing blood pressure and easing pain, and may improve mental health by easing anxiety and depression. It takes skill and discipline. You would want to have a coach, I think, to help you as you get started, because you can easily get frustrated with yourself, and that can really work against your beneficial processes of meditation pretty strongly. But I do have the basics here, and it looks like it's a pretty bad slide, and I'm sorry for that. It may have it on the next slide as well, but typically you would find a comfortable place to sit or lie down, and then just close your eyes and you're breathing slowly and deeply. You're directing your attention to your breath as you inhale, as you exhale, being very aware of what's happening, feeling it maybe somewhere in your body, or like at the end of your nose, maybe you can feel that air coming in and going out. And if your mind starts to wander, you don't get mad at yourself. You just bring it back to the breath. Those periods of awareness, oh, my mind has wandered. That is what meditation is. It's that awareness. So you just bring it back to the breath. And maybe just try 5 minutes at first. But as you get more comfortable, you can increase the time. And again, as someone who learned to meditate, I really do recommend starting with a teacher, starting with others. It can be really helpful. But we can see that our brain before and after meditation actually can change its structure. This is a very active area here, and you can see how it's all pulled back and calmed in response to meditation. There are a few other things we could look at in here, like left versus right activation and so forth, but just focusing now on this active region and how this individual through meditation has pulled that back and allowed the brain to rest. We also know that we have pain relief through meditation. We can see the areas associated with rest and pain, the areas associated with meditation and pain, and we can see that those areas really, this pain region is diminished quite a lot through this meditation. So in summary, there's a lot in here that we've barely touched the surface of, but sleep is an essential part of mental and physical health. REM sleep is important for psychological processing, like memory and emotion. Deep sleep is essential for recovery, pain management, and healing. Insomnia is a common problem linked to other disorders, and we looked at the 4-factor model to explain the insomnia, the causes and perpetuation of insomnia. Sleep hygiene involves the establishment of routines and health practices to aid good sleep, and meditation can serve the same function of sleep in terms of processing and recovery. Thanks for tuning in.